Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges. That's where ADAPT come in. We're not your typical trade union, but instead a modern, apolitical alternative, offering expert legal, employment and mental health support. Protection without the politics. So what makes ADAPT different? We're always apolitical and independent, specialised solely in supporting individual teachers. Our caseworkers are professionally qualified, ensuring you always get the best advice. Plus, there's 24/7 mental health support. Whether it's a simple contract check or handling serious allegations, ADAPT are here for you. Join the thousands of educators who've chosen ADAPT to protect their careers. Subscribe at adapt.org.uk today. ADAPT. Supporting school staff. Protecting careers.
Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Just while we get everyone sorted and into the space, stick with us because we've got a show for you tonight. As you can see in the title, we're talking, at least for some of it, mobile phones in schools. And Tom Rogers has joined us. Hi, Tom.
Good evening, Nathan. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Tired, and it's Monday, and that's not a good sign.
Yeah, that isn't a good sign. It's too early to be tired, mate. Anyway, we have got a fascinating show tonight lined up. The main focus of which is going to be all around the future of digital tools in schools and in classrooms. Particular reference to mobile phones. Obviously, this is on the back of the news reports last week around the suggestion to ban, the advice to ban mobile phones in the classroom, and the implications of that, but also the implications, I guess, of that on other digital tools and other digital skills and digital provision in classrooms, and where that sort of leaves that, if you like. I've got two guests at least tonight. I've got Steve Chalk, hopefully, who will be arriving imminently to talk about his views on mobile phones in schools. He's been very vocal on social media about it. He said there is no mobile phones crisis in schools, which I thought was interesting, and I want to ask him, a little bit more on that to see what his thinking is on that. I think he's here now, actually. And, he said that there is no mobile phone crisis in schools. Every school he knows has a wise mobile phone policy in place. So talking about a ban simply uses up valuable time that should be used addressing the real issues like teacher recruitment and retention or diversity and inclusion, for example. Steve is about to, just before you unmute yourself, Steve, it's in the bottom left, by the way, in case you don't know how to do it. Steve is the founder of Oasis. They run schools, they support housing, youth and family work, local churches. He's a former UN special advisor and he lives in London. Steve, you can unmute yourself bottom left if you can. Hello.
I have done. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you loud and clear. How are you doing this evening?
Very well. I've just got in and this is the first time I've ever used this particular piece of technology. So thank you for guiding me through it.
Superb, not a problem. I was just going to ask you, I've given you a little introduction there, the founder of Oasis, and obviously former UN Special Advisor. Can you tell me one other interesting fact about you that most people wouldn't know?
I am the world record holder for being the person who's raised most money ever through running a marathon anywhere. In fact, I've been the Guinness World Record holder 3 times. First of all, I raised £1.2 million and in 2005 and became the Guinness World Record holder for any marathon anywhere in the world. Then Steve Redgrave, the rower, beat my record the next year and he raised 1.7 million. And so the next year I beat his record and raised another 1.8 million. And then a lot of years went by. And in 2011, I did it again, ran it again, and I raised 2,330,000. And that is the world record to this day. So every year I'm in the Guinness Book of Records.
Wow. And was that from like individual donations?
Yeah, individual
Oh
donations.
my word.
All for use for pastoral work and care through our schools.
That's incredible. Well, that isn't it. I wasn't expecting that. I was thinking like, oh, I like broccoli, you know, or something like that. Like not like I hold the Guinness World Record for the most amount of money raised from a marathon. That is
I do
impressive stuff.
I do like broccoli.
What's it like being a UN special advisor?
Well, it's something that I did for 8 years. I don't do it anymore. But
Yeah.
one of the wings of Oasis. Well, I'm partly Indian. In fact, 50% Indian.
Yeah.
And so Oasis works in India as well, has done for a long time, since the early 90s. And it was there that I first came across human trafficking, as we call it. Children would disappear from the schools that we were running. We set up schools in slum areas, and children would suddenly just not come anymore. And they perceived wisdom of the day was that these children had been sent out on the streets by their parents to beg. And that's why they weren't there. And slowly we realized this couldn't be the case. And some of our staff said to me, they're being kidnapped, they're being taken. And we looked into it and realized this was true, and launched a campaign around this in India and back here. And slowly that grew. And so I developed a whole body of knowledge around this. And eventually I talked to the UN about it. They didn't believe what I had to say to start with. They then came round to that, and they appointed me to that role, which I've filled for 8 years. And off the back of it, we launched another Oasis charity, which is called Stop the Traffic. So if you look at Stop the Traffic, you'll find that we work with law enforcement agencies, anti-crime agencies around the world to track down trafficking rings and to bring them to justice and set people free. We've been doing that for 20 years now. Yeah.
Because I know I've got limited time with you, so I want to really crack on to sort of why I asked you to come on here, which is, just one sort of tweet that you put out, which was last week, I think, where you said there's no mobile phones crisis in schools. So every school I know has a wise mobile phone policy in place. So talking about a ban simply uses up valuable time that should be used addressing the real issues like teacher recruitment and retention, or diversity and inclusion, for instance. I wondered whether you could expand on that and sort of tell me what your thinking is on that, because I think there would be a lot of people, particularly within education, who would probably disagree and would say, yeah, there is a bit of a sort of mobile, I don't know if they call it a mobile phones crisis in schools, but a massive mobile phones problem in schools. So, I mean, yeah, can you expand on that? There is no mobile phones crisis in schools.
Yeah, well, I think where there is a problem, it's to do with a lack of leadership, clarity of leadership. So we got 54 schools, and they don't all have the same policy. Some of them are, some of them, we don't like to use the word ban, because that sounds penal, doesn't it? It's really talking to a young person about, no, phones aren't going to be in lessons, because it will disturb your learning in these ways, etc., distract you. But it's clear and it's firm. But then I was talking to one of our head teachers who runs an absolutely brilliant school for all the way through to 19-year-olds in a really, really tough community. And we run a youth centre there, and we even work in the local hospital, where we another staff team works with kids who arrive as young people who arrive, I should say, up to the age of 22, who've been beaten up, who are drugged or drunk or been stabbed, etc., etc. So that's the environment we're working in. And she said to me just the other week, she said, Steve, I'd never put a ban in place. We allow our children to take their mobile phones into classrooms because they have to learn how to handle a phone and how to be in charge of it and how to manage it, instead of it managing their lives. And we have a policy, and she said it works brilliantly.
But what is that policy?
I can't tell you in detail, as she could tell you if she was on on this call now. but she's a stunning head teacher in every regard. And she said, I think the thing I can say to you is simply this, Roger, that
Tom.
what Tom, you're Tom and not Tom and not all right, okay. Right. Okay, sorry, Tom.
It's all right. Crack on.
Are you Tom Rogers?
That's my name.
Ah, got it now, Tom. So I think the thing I can say to you, I was talking with a group of our senior educationists, central educationists, just this morning. Actually, we had a meeting together, and they were saying it's our job to help children manage digital media
Yeah.
and do it well, because they're at great threat from it. Phones aren't wrongly used in schools, at least not in schools I know. And I'm not just speaking for Oasis schools. I'm interested. You received, feedback from teachers who said they see it differently, because the massive response that I got from union leaders and from senior head teachers across the country was, thanks, Steve, for saying that. Thanks, Steve, for saying that
Was
we've
that
got
in?
good
Yeah,
policies.
was that in the replies or in sort of DMs?
Yeah, in their replies, their tweets to
Yeah.
me, little emails to
Yeah.
me. Of course, I know some of the union leaders and senior
Yeah.
educationists around the country, and I didn't get one person who responded to me saying, "You don't know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. It's
Yeah.
out of control." So I think that our task, of course, is to equip young people to use digital technology, because without that, they're not going to get very far in the workplace. And the abuse of digital technology happens outside school, not inside school. So you might ban your phones, and some of our senior leaders do, to use your terminology, Tom, ban phones. They're just not used and left outside of a classroom. But the point is, the minute they get out your front door, they're going to be back on those phones. So what are we doing to prepare our young people for that world and to help them stay safe in that world?
Would there be the argument, though, to say that it's sort of good to protect children from that world until they're a bit older, or that they're a bit older and wiser, if you like, to the sort of extremities of like what is on the phones and what is accessible on the phones, or would you sort of, with the argument you've made, that they need to be around them and they need to hold them and they need to be on them to understand what they're going to be like for the future?
Oh, they've got to be they've got to learn how to use this wonderful technology wisely and well. Hey, when I went to school, there was no internet.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was in primary school.
Yeah.
Because I remember when it happened. So perhaps I was in what we call year 5 or year 6, probably year 5. And it was a wet playtime, because there was this old shed that we used to stand under. I mean, it's a huge shed. It's a covered play space, effectively. And my friend in my year, John Dean, his name was, out of his pocket, he got the centerfold of a porn magazine. So these were lurid pictures of 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 a woman's body, up close pictures of parts of a woman's body.
Yeah.
And he stood around laughing about it, and everybody did. So mobile technology is the current latest social media. The social media of that day was just print. And what I needed was a moral framework in which to operate, which allowed me to understand what was good for me and good and bad for me, and what was honorable to a woman and what wasn't. And fortunately, that was given to me. What I'm saying is, you can't protect any child from digital media. What we should be doing is preparing them for a world that's full of digital media. I am not saying that phones should be used in classrooms, rampantly. I'm saying that every good school leader has a good policy in place, which will be bespoke to that school and that community.
I mean, just to sort of throw in a few bits there, which I'd love you to, because that was really interesting, sort of what you said there, and I'd love for you to sort of respond to these. So Tom Bennett, who is obviously the government's behaviour advisor, said some people say, oh, but most schools ban phones already. Not quite. Lots of them have policies, but many of them aren't enforced consistently. Lots of staff ignore it. And that's an example of what I call a misbehaviour policy, when you have a rule no one upholds. And then in sort of the replies to this, somebody said, that doesn't match with my experience. Is there any data to back this up? And he said, I've no idea, but I've now been to about 800 schools in the UK, and that's my consistent experience. And yeah, I think in the other comments he's made very clear that he does see mobile phones as a really sort of big issue. And that's one sort of point that I would love to hear your response to in a moment. Just before I ask you on that one, I think it would be a great time for me to say a big thanks to Adapt, who sponsor this show, and you can actually find out more about them at the top of this space. There's a little pinned message there where you can click through and find out more about Adapt. They're not your typical union. They offer legal advice, 24-hour support for teachers, and you can find out more about them by visiting their website. And further to that, if you're interested in a subscription to Adapt, you can get 10% off a subscription, either annual or monthly, by using the code TTR annual or TTR monthly. Now, Steve, apart from what Tom Bennett said, I also wanted to put to you the findings from some research on mobile phones. And in this particular research, which was done by somebody called Thornton and Company, in a paper called Social Psychology, they found that the mere presence of a mobile phone in a room led to a 20% reduction in attention, concentration, and performance in tasks that were demanding and complex, ones that students had to think hard about. It found that students perform worse in these tasks, regardless of whether they could see their own phone nearby or someone else's. So in other words, if a phone was on a desk but out of reach of the student, they would still perform worse, given the fact it's there, because they'd be thinking about using it, I presume. And the third point, this reduction in performance was found to be true regardless of the student's gender, age, how much they normally use their own phone, or how attached they said they felt to it. Related research found that there were wide-ranging costs of excessive mobile phone use. In psychological research, there's been lots of things linking it to worse grades, linking it to higher levels of stress and anxiety and fear of missing out. How do you sort of respond to that research? Because based on what you said a few moments ago, you're broadly in favour of mobile phones, maybe not in class, but certainly in and around school.
I'm in favour of clear policies which help young people deal with the fact that they live in a digital age and learn to handle their phones well, as much as I had to learn to handle print media well. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that students should, be sat there with their phone phone on the desk and texting or WhatsApping or etc. using Instagram, which I was told yesterday evening by a bunch of teenagers is now going out of fashion. But I'm not suggesting any of that. And some of our schools do have a strict ban, but not all of them. And the one that I mentioned, where a head teacher says to me, I would never ban mobile phones. Unbelievably, perhaps to you, Tom, in the light of all this research, it's one of the best performing state schools in the country. And it takes children through from the age of 2 to the age of 19, and on into university, etc. It's up there with the best performing schools in the country, and yet has not banned mobile phones. So there's research and research, isn't there? Normally, research tells you what you wanted it to tell you before you put the data in. I wouldn't believe everything you read in terms of data, but I do think that every school needs to have a clear policy. And if people are reporting back that there are policies in place that are not being upheld, then that's a failure of leadership, isn't it, in that school and team.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I suppose what I'm getting at is, I think you've either it's sort of, when it comes to mobile phones, I think it's either you're sort of generally in favour of them being in classrooms and schools, or generally not in favour. So I think from what you're, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think from what you're saying, you are generally in favour of
No,
it.
no. That is
Okay.
putting words in my mouth. You see, what I'm saying is that every child lives in a world where they have to handle digital technology. And surely a part of a 21st century education is not to put our head in the sand and say, well, we just leave that to someone else. You have to tackle this subject. Now, you may say to children that in this school, phones will not be brought into a classroom, and I want you to leave them all at reception every morning and you pick them up on the way out. And some of our schools do that. Some of our schools do not choose that as a policy. It is incumbent on all of our schools that children are paying attention during lessons, but also that we are helping them to cope and handle and manage a world where the moment they get their phone back and they're wandering home, they can be bombarded by all sorts of messages. How are we giving them guidance to know how to deal with that? The thing that I've not said, simply because it's not come up in the discussion yet, is that what we did as Oasis at the beginning of the lockdowns is we invested in 35,000 iPads.
Okay.
We are told by Apple, because we had 32,000 students, and we bought iPads for many of the staff as well. But we invested in those to use in the classroom and to take home. So it's a gift from Oasis to every child. It's not because we got extra money, by the way. We just get the same general annual grant as anyone else. It's about how you manage all that money. We believe that the digital aspect of education is very important. And by giving children an iPad, one, you can police it and control it. Two, everybody sees the same stuff. Three, they can continue learning at home, whether it's a lockdown or not, and use it every night as they do. And it also gives you this link with their parents. So parents' evenings, we of course still do, but parents can talk to us through those iPads on any and every day of the week, and they can see how their child is progressing in any subject. So that's a good use of digital technology. But of course, it means that you don't need to be using your phone in a lesson for digital learning because this iPad's sat there.
But Steve, one thing I would say is, yeah, I do totally understand the argument you're putting across. I really genuinely do. And I do think that, it is absolutely important that children, do have access to digital tools, etc. However, when you think about someone like Bill Gates, who is obviously, a tech guru to the extent that neither of us will ever be, somebody who understands the technology that's being created, understands the importance of technology, because his company is a technology company, in obviously Microsoft. He said that his children were not going to be allowed to own their own phone until the age of 14. And he said, quote, "We often set a time after which there is no screen time, and in their case that helps them get to sleep at a reasonable hour." And he stopped them having access to a phone, full stop, until at least the age of 14. And then I think after that, he then limited and restricted access. But I mean, you're suggesting that's the wrong approach.
No, what I'm suggesting is that not every parent is Bill Gates.
Yeah, but surely that matters. Surely it matters, though, that Bill Gates, as somebody who really truly understands digital technology and phones and the power of technology, surely it matters that someone as influential as him would say that.
Of course, I'm sure that Bill Gates would also teach his children, don't take drugs, don't hang about on street corners, don't get groomed, etc., etc. Don't smoke. I hope he teach them all of those things. What I'm saying is that's not the real world that we live in for many children.
No, I mean,
And
well,
so
no,
where do
I
you
mean, it's
start?
obvious. It's
Do you
the
start with where you want the world to be, or do you start with how the world is and the real lives that these children live? Oasis runs schools which are in socio-economically deprived communities, where there's huge threats to, in many cases, to their well-being and their safety in communities around them. I am not an advocate of mobile phones. Please let me say that again. I'm trying to say that in any way I can. What I'm saying is we have to deal with the world in which children live and prepare them for that. And I trust our head teachers, we're a team.
Yeah.
I trust each head teacher in each one of our schools who all understand that, to have an appropriate policy in place. Some of them say all phones should be left in reception every morning and picked up at the end of the day. Not all of them choose to take that pathway.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, every school is going to be different. Every school in the country is going to be different on this. I suppose, from my perspective, I was interested in your, your sort of personal views and approach, which is coming across, by the way. I understand what you're sort of arguing for. I guess there would be those who would say, yeah, okay, Steve, we understand that you want children to get used to the technology they're going to be exposed to, but Steve, they might say, but what about TikTok? What about bullying on Snapchat? What about bullying? What the device of the phone can be a vehicle for things that it would be better if they could be avoided. So therefore, this idea of
Yeah,
sort
but
of
Tom, I just don't see how any of that's got anything to do with school, where a phone, if it is present, is going to be allowed simply because that head teacher decides that this is a great way of helping a child resist the temptation to spend their life looking at a screen and avoid some of the dangers. Absolutely, we know about the dangers of TikTok. Those start after school. So you can be the strictest head teacher in the world. It's the moment you return the phone to the child that happens. And I'm sure you understand that as clearly as I do. So I agree with everything you're saying, but that's nothing to do with a good, solid, transparent, and clear mobile phone policy in schools, which will vary. By the way,
yeah.
I am told by my friends who are teachers' union leaders
Yeah.
that it's beyond the power of the Secretary of State
It
for
is.
Education
Yeah.
to insist on this anyway. So the whole argument becomes, you see, it's
But I
just
think
another load of piffle,
yeah,
isn't
no,
it?
but no,
Rather than
it doesn't. It doesn't though,
confronting
because as
right,
you've said, there are some.
rather,
But as you said, there are some people that you work alongside who would say, I don't think we want to ban phones. I think we want phones to be used in classrooms and in school. There are people you work with who believe that, and I think and you back those people. There are other people who would say that's the wrong thing to do. Yeah, that's the debate I'm having is, and I'm trying to ascertain that. I think what you're saying is you're happy with that approach if that's what they want to do, and I'm saying that there are other people out there who would say that is not a good approach.
Yeah, and that would be a debate, as I suppose I made clear through what I've said, amongst our head teachers. They will take different views. The thing is, are you going to try to centrally control all of this, or do you actually trust the people that you've asked to lead your schools? And I think we're in a position where we trust those we've asked to lead. And it's not just a head teacher, is it? It's a senior leadership team taking these decisions together and monitoring a policy which, if they don't think is working, are likely to change that policy. The truth is, I'll say it again because it's the fundamental point, everybody worries about TikTok and etc. etc. That the terrible racist, misogynistic, sexist influences that there are on social media. You do not protect a child from that by taking their phone away from them in a classroom, though many of our schools do.
I disagree
You
with that.
protect a
Steve.
child from that.
I would
You,
actually disagree with that. I think you protect them from that in that moment at that time.
of course you do, but it's not in. No one's looking at Andrew Tate in a maths lesson.
Well,
They
no,
are
but
not.
sometimes they can be.
And
If phones
well,
are
then,
allowed, if phones
well, then,
are allowed in classrooms,
okay.
as you've
So,
said, then sometimes
hey,
they can have a phone under the table and they might be watching an Andrew Tate.
hey, Tom, I don't know how many classrooms you go in, but if you're in your classroom, if you are a teacher, that's what's happening. But, you need to give yourself a good check, don't you? I mean, there's a kind of that is not happening. And if it is happening, it's something that needs to be dealt with, and it's because of the corrosive influence of social media that every child needs to be well equipped as to how to deal with these things. And you say you can protect them from this in that moment. Well, if that moment is a science lesson or a geography lesson and you're protecting them from that, you're not teaching a very engaging lesson, are you? Our task is to protect our task is to protect them from that at 3:30 or 4 or whenever it is they leave school. In a child's life, they spend in a child's year, they spend 20% of their time in school, and that's if they come every day without fail that the school's open, because they're big holidays. If they attend every breakfast club and every after school activity and every summer or half term or holiday activity, if you add it all up, it still amounts to less than 20% of their time. The question is, what are they doing for the other 80% of their time? And how are we helping them manage that and protect them from that? I think I've got nothing more to say about it than that.
Yeah.
And head teachers and senior leadership teams need to choose the wise way forward. And I think the reaction, I don't know who you've been talking to, but the mass reaction, as I'm sure you know, from teaching staff around the country was, what is this Secretary of State talking about? Of course, we have these policies in place. So, if anybody on this call or of schools that don't have good policies in place, well, then perhaps you need to put together a paper for them to help them with it. But I can't say anything more than that.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think, as I say, I think there will be people who would maybe disagree with some of the things you said. I would disagree with the implication that you can't have an engaging lesson without mobile phones in it. No,
I didn't say that. But,
we'll have to listen back to the recording.
I've got to go in I've got to go in a minute, actually. But I didn't say that. I said that we provided. Of course, you can have an engaging lesson without mobile phones in it. I don't think I've said that. I've not said that at all. What I've said is that. Well, I won't even say it again. You know what I've said about preparing kids for the use of mobile phones, and you know what I've said about our use of iPads as an educational tool.
Yeah.
But I've not said at any point that you can't have an engaging lesson without a mobile phone.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a bit, I disagree. I think the sort of implication that if a child is using a phone under a table in a lesson, then you can't be doing your job very well as a teacher. I disagree with that. I think
we do have a disagreement about that, because I stand by that. Blimey, open your eyes, take a look around, engage the class. If the class are engaged, that wouldn't be happening.
You can have a very engaged class of 30 plus students, and you can always have one student who, for whatever reason, decides, if you have a policy where phones are allowed, who might try and use that phone. I don't think that's any reflection.
And if you've got a policy where phones aren't allowed, you can have a very disengaged child as well. So
absolutely.
So we're confusing things. I must go.
Anyway, Steve.
I must go. I think it's a
thank
great
you so
discussion.
much for coming on.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me, Tom. It's been great talking.
Brilliant, robust chat. Thanks very much.
Thanks
indeed.
a lot. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Steve. Bye.
Okay, we've got Glyn on now. Glyn, if you want to unmute yourself.
Good evening.
Good evening to you. How are you this
I'm
evening?
good, thank you. It was great listening into that with Padre Steve there. That was really good.
Yes, absolutely. And a very robust conversation, it must be said. Was there anything in there that I know you listened to the whole of that. I mean, is there anything in there you agree or disagree with?
I think it's just on the nuance of an engaged class. I think for those of us that are out of the classroom more often than those of us that are in, it really is difficult for us to keep making these sort of broad statements. I think I'm leaning more towards your view of it. You can have 28 kids absolutely engaged, heads down and working, and you could still have one kid on a mobile phone. That does not mean the lesson's not engaging. It means the kid's distracted and the pull of the mobile phone.
But I think Steve disagreed with that. Steve was saying that, that if that happens in a class, that there must be a problem with the teaching. The lesson can't be engaged.
I can see his point of view, but I do think the pull of mobile phones and social media is such that, well, we know it ourselves. Look at us as adults. We too are affected by that small screen. And I think that's why certainly at our school we've not allowed mobile phones, because we don't want any distraction in the classroom. I don't want my teachers, who are highly qualified, committed people, having to deal with mobile phones. That isn't right for the children. It isn't right for the staff. It builds in the opportunity for adversity between the pair, and that's not good for anyone.
Yeah. I mean, talk us through your approach because you're a head teacher in Manchester. And I have to ask you about your ceilings first, Glyn, because the last time we spoke on here was over a year ago, and it was a while ago, it might have been even more than that, and you were basically like, your office had buckets in it, and I'm exaggerating, but
you're not. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. You basically, your school building was falling apart. What's the latest?
Well, you'll be pleased to know that it's still the same. We're now into year 15 of the building's life, with countless iterations of repairs having taken place, none of which have actually fixed the issue. So whilst I'm absolutely sympathetic to all of our colleagues who are affected by RAAC, forgive me, there is a bigger club of PFI schools who face problems day in, day out without any resolution.
Wow, mate, that's grim.
Yeah. I mean, when it rained last week, I think we had about 36 leaks affecting 6 classrooms and 14 separate areas of the school. So, there's not many spaces that you don't come across a leak, but the kids and the staff are so great with it now that they sort of just are so used to it, they move around them. But we keep fighting, which is, what we've got to do, isn't it? The children deserve better.
Do you think there is a crisis when it comes to mobile phone use in schools?
No.
Or not?
Of all the opportunities that the Education Secretary had, she could have engaged with us on that platform in a huge way, giving confidence to us, saying, we recognise this, we recognise that, we're going to do this, we're going to... And instead, we get an announcement that's been pulled out of the hat every year for the last 8 years. And I don't believe it's one of the things keeping senior leaders or teachers awake at night. What is the recruitment and retention, the funding of special needs, the lack of stability in the direction of educational policy. We are so lacking in clear leadership in that area.
When you say sort of it'd be nice just to touch briefly on, I say briefly because we talk about it all the time on TTR, but on the issue of recruitment and retention for a moment. What, since we last spoke, which I think was about 18 months ago, it was a year, 18 months ago on here. Obviously, you've been through probably a couple of cycles of recruitment since that conversation. Is it as bleak as it has ever been? What is your rate of application per teaching job that you advertise?
So we've got some, what I'd like to think are pretty good jobs out there, not just the standard sort of entry teacher level job, but jobs that come with responsibility and opportunity. I've got an assistant head teacher post out at the moment for attendance, and I've had 4 applications and 2 of them are internal. Normally, when I first became a senior leader, we'd be looking at 15 to 20. So I think there is a challenge, and I think we are not yet seeing the full extent of that challenge.
I mean, Is there anything that's happened in the last 2 years that's given you hope when it comes to recruitment and retention?
Oh, lots. Yeah.
Yeah, thing.
Firstly, the people who are leaving ITT courses now, they know what they're coming into. That's not bravery, that's courage. They are saying, yeah, I know it's bad, I know it's tough, but there's something about this job that means it's more than a job to me, and I want to go into that sector and make a difference. That's fantastic. Equally, what gives me great hope is the fact that I think the education community is absolutely united on that issue of things have to get better. For the government to have all 4 major teaching unions aligned on recruitment and retention says how vastly wrong we are at the moment, and therefore there must be hope that better things will come. Because if we don't share that belief, if we don't really believe that one man or one woman with an idea can change the world, then we are promoting the idea that our young people will face adversity and it will get worse for them. And I don't believe that's the right message.
Let's move on to the mobile phone thing, because that was a really interesting discussion with Steve, because I want to broaden it out as well into sort of digital tools as well and how you see them. So in your school, you're obviously a head teacher. What's your policy? Well, I want to ask you twofold. Number one, what is your policy on mobile phones? And number two, what is your general view on mobile phones?
So our policy, which has been in existence for over 10 years now, is that they're not to be seen or heard in school. If they are, we want a no conflict resolution for that issue, and therefore, if they are seen or heard, 99% of the time, the child will hand over the phone. It gets taken to a secure safe in the school, and it's handed back to the child at the end of the school day, and that's the end of the matter. If they refuse, that is escalated, and there's a sanction, and parents are called, because we want no disruption to learning. However, we acknowledge, though, that there is a time and a place when children need to use mobile phones as part of a learning opportunity. But we program that in, as we would do when you program in other activities like, taking to the swimming pool. It should not be so unclear or grey for the young people that they feel as though they've been led down the garden path. But equally, it shouldn't be so out of sight that they don't understand the risks and dangers involved in such devices. But it has to be well managed.
So do you have specific time or curriculum time where the students have their phones?
Yeah. We have events across the year, and they're well publicised events to make sure that parents and students understand what it is. But equally, I have to be upfront as well and say that not every child has a mobile phone. Let's be frank. I know it's easy for society to say that they do, but many of them don't. Many parents now actually are seeing the benefits of their child not having a super duper smartphone. They might have a mobile phone for answering calls, but nothing else. And so what we've got to try and balance is the fact that many schools do have ICT-rich environments. You can teach online safety and mobile phone safety without having a mobile phone. Because, let's be honest, there is more than just the Apple iPhone. There are many, many different versions of phones. And we don't teach children to use all those different phones. We teach them about the principles of how to use it safely. And we do use curriculum time for that.
By the way, this is a wonderful conversation and we're going to dig deeper into it. But if anybody else wants to join in the conversation, you can just click the little icon in the bottom left-hand side, the little blue icon. Click that to request to speak. So if you have a view on sort of mobile phones in schools, in classrooms, and do you think they should be sort of banned outright, even though government can't do that? If they could do it, would you be a supporter of that, or would you be saying, as sort of Steve was saying, that it should be down to individual heads? And actually, he was saying he knows successful schools where there are, it's just a blanket, you are allowed phones in sort of in the school type thing. And he says there are examples of those schools that are very successful. So it would be lovely if you have a view on any of that. Click that little icon bottom left, join myself and Glyn in this conversation. You would be more than welcome to do so. Before we move on, would be another good opportunity for me to give a massive shout out to our sponsor on the show tonight, that is Adapt. If you haven't heard of Adapt, click the link at the top of this space, which we've pinned, and you can see the Adapt logo in there. Adapt isn't your typical teaching union. They can offer you legal support, they can offer you advice, they can offer you on-tap mental health and well-being support. We've met Alistair on TTR, the CEO, fantastic guy.
Well worth checking out. And if you do like what you see when you do check out Adapt, you can get 10% off an annual or monthly subscription with them, which is more cost effective than most memberships of a similar form. 10% off. Just use the code TTR annual or TTR monthly to take advantage of that. As I say, it's pinned at the top of the space if you want to find out more. So, Glyn,
Yes.
in terms of digital tools in general, how do you see the future of digital tools in classrooms? Like, do you know, with the emergence of ChatGPT, with the emergence of, you know, things are accelerating so fast. Like, I'd be interested when it comes to AI. Like, what's been your school response to AI?
That's a big one. I mean, I think AI undoubtedly gives us so many benefits. I think we've really got to engage, and I do believe the government put something out today, actually, asking for people to get involved in some trials around AI and also to do some trials around hacking, which is really interesting that we're moving into the space whereby even government acknowledges in education that this is an opportunity and risk balance to take place. I've certainly used ChatGPT, and I've got to be honest with you, I found it useful for things like writing a standard letter and getting a scaffold for it. You know, you put in the basics of what you want the letter to be, and it will spit out something that's fairly usable, but then needs personalising. But actually, that really helps me get more done, if I'm going to be frank. And I found that very useful. I think where we've got to go in education is understand that yes, there's all of the risks around plagiarism, but ultimately that's always existed. It's just coming in a different form, so we have to evolve and adapt with it. And I go back to the point that I'm not so sure that terminal exams in a summer in a sports hall are necessarily the best way to assess children after 5 years of learning. So I hope we shall see.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of potential, isn't there, with AI in terms of like, I mean, I know the government have mentioned this many, many times about like AI and workload, and they're sort of pinning a lot of sort of hopes on it when it comes to reducing teacher workload. Like, do you share that hope in it, or do you see that as like that's a bit sort of misguided, that could be a real filler?
I mean, I'm struggling to see how they will at scale improve workload, and that might be my naivety and lack of innovation in my mind. But schools now are so nuanced with their curriculum. It's unique to every school. We have to defend our curriculum. We have to defend our assessments. And therefore, I'm not so sure how a one size fits all assessment booster or whatever it's going to be to take marking away from teachers is going to help. And I've got to be honest and say, I'm not so sure my teachers would want to lose the diagnostic approach of marking themselves. That's how they know the children. That's how they get that relationship with the child, because they see the individual journey rather than just the data. And yes, I'd love to reduce the amount of time that they have to do that, but that's part and parcel of the curriculum and teacher management of it. So I'm yet to be convinced that AI is going to be the panacea that perhaps the government hopes for.
Do you think that, I mean, Steve there was talking about sort of that you know, they've rolled out a big like iPad program, and you know, obviously like sort of the embracing of digital tools. I mean, do you think that if a teacher doesn't embrace technology, it's more difficult for them to be a good teacher?
Ooh, I'm not too sure. I think some of the most effective teachers I know can just take a sheet of paper and a pencil and make an amazing lesson from their skill and craft of teaching. But equally, I've seen some phenomenal uses of technology to enhance learning. I think it's about the teacher understanding what the needs of the children are. You know, so for example, we do talk about technology making a difference in schools, but for some children, I do think it's a barrier. I think for their sensory needs or for their own learning approach, it can be quite overstimulating for some to have a big screen to stare at, as well as a teacher talking, as well as a book in front of you. So I think there's a balance to be struck from it, and that's where I actually agree with Steve that each head teacher and each group of teachers need to decide on a policy that works for their children, rather than it being a blanket one.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I sort of, you know, personally took that point on board, and I do understand that. I mean, within your sort of peer group of like heads and leaders, how many would you say have a policy that allows mobile phones in like the school?
I don't know. I don't
Do
know
I?
of any. I don't know of any.
Yeah.
And that's not to.
Because I need
Yeah.
to find who Steve was referring to, because I want to speak to that head.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fabulous that they've got a school that can
Yeah.
manage
If that
Yeah,
works,
brilliant.
then I think there will be those who would be skeptical and would say that it might work on the surface to have mobile phone use everywhere, but I don't actually. You know what? Like, I mean, this is something I've written about before in terms of the link between exam results and what the teacher does, or what, how the lessons are taught. I mean, I see environmental factors, hereditary factors. There's lots of research. I did a show on this a couple of months ago on TTR, actually, about, I don't know if you caught it, but it was about like exam results, and it was around the time of exam results day, and it had Robert Plummer on it and Dylan Willem and all these other people. And the big thing that came out of that for me, it just reaffirmed my sort of views that, we do attach probably a lot of weight to the link between teacher quality and student exam results. Now, we could easily do the same thing when it comes to phones. Like, I don't believe that having a school where lots and lots of mobile phones are around would necessarily, like, if you've got smart, like children with high attainment in the school, like, I don't believe that having phones in it would suddenly result in like a 50% fall in exam results. Like, I don't believe that. I just think, like, if anything, it might help some, it might not help others. The bit I would worry about is more on the behavior side, and more on the pastoral side of what they're accessing on the phones when they have access to them, and how that is controlled and moderated. I don't know, but maybe that's just me being really paranoid and worried.
No, I think you're probably right, and I think that's where I come at it from. Really, is when my staff come into work every day, they really should just be teaching. That's what the job title is, teacher, and yet they deal with a plethora of other issues so brilliantly. But there are some issues that if I could, I'd love to remove, and mobile phones was one of them. The impact of mobile phones. Now, that's not to say that the pastoral team daily don't have to have conversations with young people about what they put online about another young person, because we live in a very fast and fluid environment. And particularly today, that's been really, really difficult. 33% of my community is British Muslim, and they're hurting today as much as some of our children from other faiths as well, from what's going on in the world. And they want to share that hurt via social media, which then brings in all of those other problems. And I need to help them see and equip them with the ability of sharing that hurt and those concerns and that want of care for those individuals facing such challenges in a way that doesn't result in them being hurt too. And if I can remove that from things that my teachers have to do and my learning support systems have to do, then that means they're more effective. And that's something that we're really keen on. That's something that I took from listening to Sir Clive Woodward when he talked about the England rugby squad, about removing the critical non-essentials, and mobile phones is a critical non-essential for us.
Just out of interest, you mentioned sort of the really tragic events in the last few days. What has been the sort of reaction on the ground, if you like, in the school? Is it been a sort of, because I know some commentators have said this is like for many people it's sort of 9/11 sort of shockwaves type thing. I mean, have you seen a really tangible reaction across the school community?
Well, today's our Patron's Feast Day, and so as a Catholic school, we do make sure that our values are apparent, but we're a really inclusive school, and we're very proud of that. We're very, very proud of that. But on a day like today, when it should be about celebration, the head of faith and community was really clear. Actually, it's about reflection and building hope and bridges between everyone. So whilst we didn't have a palpable reaction to it, there is a sense of grief and concern in our students about how they can articulate some of their angers, frustrations, worries, and fears in an environment whereby actually we want them to do it in school. We've got to help them to do it in school in a way that is appropriate. Because whether you're a Muslim student, a Jewish student, a Christian student, whatever, I don't think any educator is sat here now saying we want the wanton destruction of two peoples to happen. We've got to help our children understand that those events are horrific on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned actually before that about the sort of, I guess, ability of being able to access a mobile phone or access social media as a sort of outlet for students. Do you think there's also like the downside to that? I mean, in your time of head teacher, you must have come across, the good sides and bad sides of phones and technology for students.
Yeah. I mean, certainly during COVID, we saw a number of students. It was a lifeline for them to access education. I think as we all scrambled around to try and make effective use of technology, but then equally that increased the risk for other young people to be left behind and other young people to be hurt by the process of it. So I think technology has moved far quicker than we anticipated from an educational point of view. I may be wrong there, but I think as well, COVID accelerated. It gave it almost a super boost. And in that time, that's when government and our education sector, we had a real opportunity to rethink what we wanted for contemporary education and its goal. And I don't think we grasped that. And I think that was a joint failing on everyone's part. We really needed to start the conversation around what education is to be and how technology plays its part in it. And I don't think we fully explored that.
Why?
Well, I think firstly because fundamentally there isn't a common agreement about what the goal of education is, because every time the government changes, they change what the view of education is to be. I think we've got to look at some other countries where they have a 10-year policy on education that's reviewed at a 5-year point, so that there is some stability in process, and it isn't about a party, it's about the government and the country, so that there isn't this idea of, as we've got at the moment, the reforms to A levels, which I'm sure post-16 teachers just absolutely love more change on theirs, alongside this idea of us pursuing the EBAC now with greater aggression. When I can't feed kids and I haven't got MFL teachers for love nor money. So there is a disconnect between the goal and the reality, and COVID was the opportunity for us to expose that in a stronger way, and unfortunately it didn't come off.
If anybody wishes to share a comment or a thought who is in the space now, then you can do so by just clicking the little button in the bottom left, the little mic button, or request to speak button. If you have a thought or opinion on what we've been discussing, then you can do that. Glyn, I've got a final, maybe 2 questions for you. And the first one is around, if you this is sort of, I know what you're going to answer this, but it'll be an interesting one all the same. If you had to choose between a complete zero tolerance ban on mobile phone use in schools, or a largely a policy where students can use mobile phones in and around schools and classrooms, but with certain rules in place and filters and all the rest of it, and you had to choose one of those, which would you choose?
I wouldn't have mobile phones in school. I just wouldn't. I think I think we've got to equip the young people to be able to use them. Absolutely, we've got to make sure that they are prepared for modern life. Absolutely, but there is no place in my school for the use of mobile phones. It can't be provided by the school. At college, that might be different, and I fully respect that. In some schools, it might be different, but not in mine.
Yeah, perfect. And the last point I'm going to ask you is about your building. Now, you said that the building is still in the same condition it was when we spoke 18 months ago. Is there anything you want to say on that to finish off?
I mean, I think I bore people about it. I've got to be honest with you.
But it's awful. I mean, the last time we spoke, you said exactly the same thing. I can't actually.
Yeah, but I do bore people, but I'm not giving up. I really am not. And I personally have come into some difficulties with lawyers from big organisations who think I shouldn't be able to to speak truth, as I would say, on the matter, and I'm okay with that. I'll keep going because ultimately,
But are the kids in the school still walking around like buckets and
yes,
stuff?
absolutely, day in, day out. Even, and you're not going to believe me on this, even when it doesn't rain, because there's that much water in the building that it's soaked in the entire fabric of it that it will take days to dry out. So buckets will still be there with water coming through into the buckets even after it rains. It finishes raining. So we know we need a complete roof replacement. The building owners will not replace the roof. So we are caught between a contract where we are not part of it, and an organisation which has very deep pockets to fight against it.
I mean, the only other option I could think of is if you could change the weather. I mean, Oldham Weather are in the space, so maybe we can ask Oldham Weather if they can,
Oldham Weather
into...
is critical for my planning. When he tweets about the weather, he's accurate every time. He knows I say that about him, and he knows the extent of the problems. I haven't actually put any pictures up of our building and the leaks for about 12 months out of a bit of a courtesy, because they were really considering whether they were going to make significant improvements to the building to try and remove that problem. And that's not come about. I have said to them, the next time it rains at any sustained level, I will be taking to Twitter, because it's the only way I get any traction.
But have you got traction off Twitter on your roof?
Well, it certainly gets people involved and the media involved. It hasn't led to a lasting solution. But as I said to you, I'm not giving up. There's no why are my children having to be in a school that leaks? All those poor children in schools with rack concrete now, they will get a solution at some point, and hopefully as swift as possible. And yet there are schools like mine and other PFI schools with such significant problems. And because we're not organised and we're not heard and we're not in the contract, it moves on.
Glenn, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks ever so much for joining me again, as always.
No problem at all. Kate, take care.
Even though I couldn't actually believe it was that long ago the last time we spoke, but it was quite a while ago. So thank you very much.
God bless.
And speak to you again. Cheers. Goodbye. That was Glyn Potts, who's the head teacher in Manchester, who is fighting rack and roof issues, and we were discussing mobile phone use. This is the point where I ask anybody, just in the last 5 minutes, whether you would like to share your view on mobile phone use and whether you think that it should be, whether you think it's a good thing or bad thing, basically, whether you think that it should be banned in schools, whether by individual schools, whether by, obviously the government can't ban it. They don't have the sort of legality to be able to ban it. But if they could, do you think they should? Or do you think it should be left to individual heads and teachers and schools to do that? Or, in fact, do you believe that in certain circumstances, phones can be a good thing in schools and classes? We heard from Steve Chalk earlier, who has a head teacher in his group of schools, who has a policy where phones are allowed in the corridors, the school, the classroom. He said results are high. He said that the school is impeccable and it's doing extremely well. I don't know what school this is, by the way, but and that's where it would be interesting, because the skeptic in me, I don't know whether it's my paranoia over phones and sort of social media, but I don't know. There's something about their potential for causing trouble and problems and bullying and all the other ills that they can cause that, I think that it's best to keep them out of schools, basically. I mean, his view was that it's good to get students used to phones, and the use of phones, it's good for them to handle them, it's good for them to see what they're capable of. That is the real world that they're going to be exposed to. But I do wonder, the counter to that would be, is it better for us to protect the children up to the age of whatever it may be, 16, 18, maybe even beyond? I don't think so, but 16 or 18, is it better to protect children and students from the dangers of technology and the sort of pervading influence of social media and all the rest of it? Is it better to create a bubble away from that technology that will be the school, or is it in fact letting those children down by not integrating that into school life? My view is that it
it's fine to protect them from it within that space of time. I don't see any problem with them having a period of time every day, or Monday to Friday at least, where they can't access a phone, or at the very least, it's much more difficult for them to access a phone in the way they want to access it. If anything, I think that's just my personal opinion, it's a very positive thing. But it's interesting to hear different views on this. And I do appreciate Steve's point about the fact that we can't close ourselves off to technology either. We can't just say, you know what, let's pretend these things don't exist. Obviously they do. And I do understand his argument that, you know, to block access to certain technologies is potentially stopping students from integrating into the world. You know, I think Kim's joining us, which is very exciting. Maybe she has a view on mobile phones in schools if she can connect. There she is. Kim, if you want to unmute yourself, bottom left. There you go.
Hi. I actually worked in one of Steve's schools a number of years ago.
There we go.
And, I'm not working in Steve's schools now. That's just because of location issues. However, in the school I'm at now, we allow young people to use their devices at break and lunch times in and around the corridors, in the social spaces. However, that in itself has caused issues. And whilst I don't think that it's a bad idea for young people, like secondary, I'm talking about secondary age students here, to have access to a device to contact home or if they're in crisis, I do think that it has got out of hand. And that is as a direct result of me actually being filmed by young people and put on Snapchat.
Oh, God.
So
in school?
Yes, in school. I was filmed in school and put on Snapchat, and it wasn't particularly nice. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just don't like the idea of being filmed by young people and then by anybody, and then it being shared widely, and then it can obviously be edited and things can be miscommunicated. So personally, and I also come from a bit of a unique perspective that my husband's actually a police officer, and he is having to deal with the fallout of young people actually using phones in school, things being spread, etc. I think it's gone too far. And whilst I'm going to say I don't like our government, I don't think it'd be a bad thing to potentially ban them in the school and obviously have an opportunity for them to use it if necessary.
I mean, Kim, I don't know if you heard the chat. I think you joined maybe 20 minutes ago, but with the chat with Steve, he was saying, I mean, he said this in his tweet, he doesn't believe there's a crisis with mobile phones in schools. He thinks this is a smokescreen to sort of detract from other issues. I'm not so sure about that. I think that, I know Glyn, I don't know if Glyn's still there, but Glyn was sort of saying that, you know, that he doesn't think, he agrees with Steve, basically. He doesn't think there's a crisis of mobile phone use, but I do think there are lots of issues that are under the surface here. I think that what's interesting is adults don't know the half of what kids do. Smartwatches is a great example, right? How many adults understand and know that children might have a smartwatch going on in class? You know, probably not that many. Well, I say not that many. A proportion won't have any concept of that. And even the ones that do might not have the concept of how it might work or what a student might be able to do with it or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? So there is that sort of thing, is that sort of underworld thing. And, you know, as an example, just today, about 4:30, no, it was later than that, it was about 5:30, I went for a wander near where I live. And there was a group of 50 kids sort of next to the park. Now, I was with my girlfriend, and obviously it was sort of a bit, you know, I think maybe a bit intimidating, you know, and a bit, it's a little bit of that, but it was fine. It's fine. But my sort of point would be is without social media and phones, would they have been able to organise that meeting?
No.
You know, I'm just thinking back to my primary school and secondary school days now. Like, even if you said to people on the way out of school, meet me at 5 o'clock by wherever,
most people just wouldn't turn up. Whereas now it's like they can, it's so much more connected.
Yeah.
And and I just wonder, like I say, go on.
I just feel that I've worked in a number. I tend to work, or I choose places that have quite like unique socioeconomic, like diverse backgrounds. And in an inner city Leeds school that I was in for a few years until the pandemic, it was a blanket, no phones, just a blanket. Now, again, I'm not going to get into maths, etc. However, that blanket policy of no phones meant that young people were engaging with each other at break and lunch times. They were doing extracurricular clubs. They were so creative. There was very, very few incidences of instances of young people getting filmed, teachers, etc., because it was just a zero tolerance approach. And as a result, I don't know whether there is a link there, and it could be a smokescreen, etc. However, in comparison to the school that was next door, we were outperforming them with the same young people. And it's a concern that there's a distraction there. And I do think the mobile phone thing could potentially be a smokescreen for something bigger that's going on in our world, etc. But as the debate goes itself, we can't ignore the fact that they are a distraction. I mean, as I sit with you right now, I have my iPad, my MacBook, my mobile phone on in my face. And those devices alone are all running different things. I've got a work PowerPoint in front of me. I've got a book on my iPad, and I'm listening to you on my phone. And if that's me as an adult and an educated adult, what are other? I mean, I'm consuming things that are, that I need. They're consuming things that So it's just, how far do we take it?
Well, this is it, and this is where sort of I sort of pitched that to Steve, is that that it's all well and good to sort of presume. There are certain, I don't know, there is that sort of presumption sometimes that that all the students want to use mobile phones to learn or to do something vaguely constructive, even. Whereas the reality is that there is probably a large proportion of, I mean, I don't know, I'm just talking anecdotally here, right? I don't even know. Maybe most students are actually going down Wikipedia like holes, like I sometimes do, for like an hour and a half, and actually just sort of reading stuff. But I just get the feeling, is it TikTok, is it Snapchat, is it stuff that's just rubbish, basically.
I've got a 10-year-old, and she has a device because I share custody with my ex-husband, so that we can contact each other. She doesn't have social media per se, but she's allowed access to an app called CapCut, and she makes stupid little silly viral videos with ridiculous audios on them. And whilst I can see and hear and access everything, if that's what my 10-year-old is doing, I'm like, it baffles me what the rest of the young people out there are doing. And she's 10 and doesn't have access to social media. So imagine if she did, what would she get then? And so it's a funny one.
I have a feeling this debate is going to roll on, because I don't think, and actually with ChatGPT and other AI sort of developments in the coming years, it's going to be, it's going to get even more spicy, because the amount that students are going to be able to do with smart technology is going to be staggering, compared to like, they could send a text message on a phone. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's when I was in school, it's like, someone could send a text message and it'd take like 3 minutes for the text to go through. So you'd even have to wait for like 3 minutes to then send it back, and that'd take 3 minutes. Do you know what I mean? So actually, there wasn't as much threat there of sort of being able to communicate in the way they can now, or opportunity, as some people may pitch it. I pitched it as a threat there. That was wrong. Some people may see that as an opportunity, that level of connectivity. It's an interesting debate. It's going to roll on. Kim, thanks very much for calling. It's really good. Thank you. Right, everyone, unless anyone else wants to have their say, we're probably going to wrap that up. It was really, really nice. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Matt, Dazza, Andrew, Irene, Kareen, and Mrs. Wu. Thank you very much to you all for joining me tonight for this. This will be available as a podcast as well, if you or any of your colleagues would like to listen back to it. And of course, follow Teachers Talk Radio on whatever podcast platform that you use to keep up to date with all the shows that we have pinging out into the airwaves
this week, which is plentiful, by the way. I think we've got 15 shows this week in total. This is just one of them. So, if you want something for your commute, or for your commute there, commute home, or something to put on in the background while you're doing whatever you're doing, then check it out. There might be something in there that you think, you know what, this is an interesting topic. I'm going to listen to it. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks again to Nathan as well for administrating this space, and we will see you all soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.